Hey everyone, welcome to that virtual education show. Today's episode is brought to you by the cold and flu season, which I am finally about over, although it might pop in my voice here and there. Our topic today is communication at work. So we're always talking about conversations. Let's talk about communication because it affects conversations and definitely culture. What are some of the types of conversations you or other virtual educators note as being really awkward or maybe a little uncomfortable? Peter, we'll start with you.
The uncomfortable. I had one today.
Oh no.
Oh,
No, I can share with this. It's just I put in for some PTO and I hadn't heard back, and tomorrow's the big day that I'm taking PTO. So I had to reach out to a boss and say, "Hey, what's going on?" So it's kind of friendly. I think that the when I think of the uncomfortable conversations, it's along the lines of expectations
Mm,
for colleagues, for instance,
mhm.
that we're working on a project that's not, here's the, we all agreed upon the terms of when we'd be completed on this stage and then this stage, and something's not met, and reaching in and having that conversation can be a little bit tricky throughout the time. But I think that that's I have no idea. I just lost my train of thought. That puts us in the ballpark, right, Liz? That's what you're looking
yeah,
for.
Peter, you're speaking to conversations with someone that's managing you and you need them to do a thing and they haven't done the thing. And how do you ask them about the thing? And peers along the same way. And those conversations
Yeah.
can be really different. So, Tabitha, what about you?
Yeah. The group project thing resonates with me, just kind of that throwback to when you're a kid and you're doing group projects in school and you're like, oh man, because there's different work styles, and sometimes it's hard to figure out how to coordinate and make sure that the work is distributed equitably. So there's that type of thing when you're working on things together, which also reminds me, Elizabeth, that we started a project together last week and you did your part and I have yet to do my part. So I'm like
What?
expecting a difficult conversation from you. Maybe, oh good, you don't remember. Okay,
Well,
forget
maybe my it's like I don't even know what it is. So maybe you're going to have the conversation with me.
it.
But we had a conversation like this earlier today where you were like, "Hey, I thought we agreed to do X and I
Mhm.
did Y instead." And you were so approachable and so collaborative about it that it was so easy for me to be, oh, I forgot, I'll get on that right now. And that was it. That's all that we needed to say. And it really can be that way with colleagues that you trust and know well, and you have this history of them being very reasonable.
Mhm.
The more difficult part can be when you don't have that history. And we're going to talk about some strategies today. So I'm Elizabeth. We heard from Peter and we heard from Tabitha. And Peter, go ahead and start us off.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the because when Tabitha was talking about different work styles, and that really brought into focus, there's times where I work beside a colleague and I have a good rapport with that person, and but then when we get into working on a project, it's sort of polar opposites on an approach, and that can be really difficult when it comes
Mhm.
to really getting down to the values and saying, oh boy, I really respect this person, I know where they're coming from, I respect this approach, but I don't agree with this as best approach. So how do we move that conversation forward is can be trying at times.
Oh, I have something else too that applies, well, really to all work environments in this day and age, but specifically to virtual educators who are working from home and your primary communication with people is email, is instant
Yes.
messaging, is texting. And there are so many things that can be taken the wrong way in written communication. Um, I'm guilty of it all the time, like reading an email, and instead of taking it at face value, I'm like, okay, she said this, but did she really mean this? Like, I've probably come to you with some of those. Like, did you read that email? And what did they really mean by it? Because I just can't let myself take it at face value. So I think that is a struggle, definitely, in our environment. in regards to communication.
Tabitha, I have a really real world example. Like if I make a request to somebody, like, would it be okay if we move this date, blah, 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 and they come back with something like, that's fine. For me, I'm like, that's fine.
It's just like a knife to the heart. It's fine.
That's fine. There's, where's the enthusiasm? It's fine. What does that mean?
Enthusiasm for a schedule change, though, I would probably write, that's fine.
You would, and you wouldn't put an exclamation mark either, or
No.
a smiley face.
No, I wouldn't. I just put a period.
I'm a chronic second guesser, though. So I'm again, it's a limited data set. That's fine. Versus, hey, I'm looking at the schedule and you lay out something complete. That's fine. It's one of those ambiguous things for me that okay, can you give me a little bit more?
And that history matters so much, because if it came from me, you might take it differently than if it came from somebody that you don't know well, or your experience was kind of a little bit awkward. Well, we are teacher trainers now, but previously we were coaches, and we got years of training literally on having difficult conversations, asking powerful questions, and listening skills. And our coaching team and the teacher trainer team that we're on now is made up of a lot of the same people. And I've noticed that the cultural shift is one of the most positive teams I've ever worked on. It's one of the most positive examples of culture I've ever worked on. And I know that it's correlated. I can't say that it's caused, but I feel like all of everybody on the team at least being trained and having examples of how to have an awkward conversation led to some of that positive experience. So what about you guys? How has the way we've been trained to have conversations at work impacted your experience of culture? And we'll start with Tabitha.
The first thing that comes to mind is one of the very first lessons that I learned my first year of coaching, and that is to presume positive intent.
Absolutely.
And that really has, it's just been foundational to my conversations and to my approach to people. And I still, struggle with it, obviously, but based on what I just mentioned with interpreting emails, like if there is any room for interpretation, then I might take it the wrong way. Right. But just remembering that whatever the person is doing or saying, or however they're acting, just assume that they're doing the best that they can, instead of assuming that they're doing the worst, or intentionally trying to sabotage you. So that's definitely been, I think, the game changer for me in regards to our training. And it's just kind of helped me to remain at peace and to be able to stay calm, and just thinking through how, I don't have to come into every conversation thinking that it has to be difficult or awkward. Like, let's just assume, hey, everyone is doing the best that they can, and we'll start from there and then deal with whatever we need to after that.
It's interesting how you're saying that when you presumed positive intent, that you're negative, like you assume that they have negative emotions, and when you assume that maybe they don't, your negative emotions lifted.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's true. Mm-hmm.
Peter, what about you?
That's a big one. That presuming positive intent is gigantic, and gets you in a place to be intentional as well when responding to things. If that's fine comes my way, presume and
right.
And not dwell on that, on those sorts of things, but just having that intention of and I think it shows up as grace, what we call grace a lot at work.
Mm-hmm.
That as things are going on, an individual is doing the very best they can. So there's no, it manifests in I'm not an expert here, but here's the way I see the situation. How do you see the situation? There's a lot of that back and forth going on, and comparing of, I've reflected on this a little bit. How have you reflected on it? Okay, to come to a common understanding, because we're constantly driving at common understanding so that we can move forward from that and develop and grow.
I'm just letting both of your thoughts sink in. For me, this was a struggle, just like you guys have stated, but I had a really closed mindset about it. This is how I am. I'm a direct communicator. I'm the one that writes, "That's fine," period, and sends off the email. Or the other way would be, I would be so nervous about being perceived that way that I would have an excessive amount of smiley faces and exclamation points, and then I would be going, "Oh no, that's too much. I can only have a smiley face every other," and then we just become obsessive
Yeah.
about our communication and overcompensate. So opening my mind to have a more growth mindset, we can have a growth mindset about a lot more than just math and education, about our work skills or soft skills, was key. And this came from a great friend that I had that I worked with in a virtual education role. She was a teacher, and she would just say, like, whatever it is that she wanted to have her needs met, she would state her preference. And that had been really hard for me. I was kind of trained not to say that, I guess. And then she would just use this tone of voice to ask me a question about it that was the same tone of voice as, like, just like anything else that she would ask me. There was no tension whatsoever. And it's silly as that sounds, it was this big light bulb moment for me where I was like, "You can do this? Like, that is a thing that you can do." And fast forward a couple of years later, I found a podcast and an audiobook and a blog called Ask a Manager. It's by a gal named Allison Green, and she talks about that tone of voice. And she did the same thing. And it's where this personal to work life connection came across to me, where anything that we're really kind of struggling with as virtual educators, it might not be a niche thing for virtual educators. So go Google it and see what else is out there. Somebody else has probably figured this out, and it's not all on our shoulders to figure it out. So on this site and other communication books and experiences that we have been trained on, there were 4 kind of key ideas that seem to come up over and over again. We like to think of themes, and I just put them in C words because they're easy to remember, like 4 C's or 4 E's or what have you. So they are clear, collaborative, curious, and a check-in. And this February 2020, Peter helped me do a Promising Practices, that are a big conference for professional development on this topic. So Peter, what was your experience with going with those 4 C's? Did you agree with some of them, not on some? Did you like those 4 concepts, or what was your experience?
Um, I did. I like them very much because it can be difficult to remain intentional um, throughout a day because there's a lot going on, and sometimes we can go into default modes, right? So what I like about this is it gives one an approach
Mm-hmm.
to I'm answering email. So if I can habitualize this, if I can get to this to the point where I'm doing this as a natural response, if something comes my way, I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it in a curious light. I'm looking at how to collaborate. What are my questions moving? So it's a bit more dynamic than just here's the email. I have to respond. I'm busy right now. I've only got a couple minutes. So I'm going to, you know what I mean? It sort of
Right.
formalizes the process of let's sit down here. Let's communicate. And here's exactly how I can communicate.
It's like a
Even taking
checklist
Yeah, like a checklist,
or a
or
system.
even if you took a curious approach, if you only use one of those C's, you're going to do okay. You're going to do well. If you took a collaborative approach, um, all of those things kind of dovetail so nicely into each other, though, that you get a something of a structure because it's just not intuitive having that workplace voice, right? We might have that with our friends and family, and we can just communicate with them, and they know we're joking every single time, right? Or they know
Yeah.
where this is coming from, and they know this is a need, and they have to fulfill. But within the workplace, having a system, an underlying system, or an underlying process
Mm-hmm.
that this is my approach to communication.
Yeah. So let's dig into these 4 ideas. And Tabitha, which one, since you haven't dug in as much, which one would you like to start with? We have clear, curious, collaborative, or check-in.
I feel like I'm on Jeopardy and I get to pick the category of the
Yeah.
question. I want to go with collaborative for 200.
Okay, collaborative for 200 is what I spoke about with my friend. It's the tone of voice. You want to have this go-to question in your mind. I'm a big fan of writing these kind of questions that I need on my monitor, whatever this takes, and have this go-to question in your mind, which is whenever I ask this question, I have the tone of voice that sounds collaborative. And the question might be, hey, can you get this document to open? It's not opening for me. There's no emotion there. It's just, hey, I have a problem. Can you help me with the problem? And that's really kind of at the heart of these work conversations, is whether it's somebody didn't send you something they needed to send you, or they don't remember the assignment that you're working on, or whatever it is, that you're really trying to take a problem that you've noticed and distribute some of the responsibility to solving it with this other person. So that's a great prompt to have, whatever it is, like, hey, can you open this Excel doc? And the collaboration is in your tone, but it's also, it needs to be, it needs to be in the way that you feel, whether you're faking it until you make it, or that is how you feel that you're going to work with this person, alongside with this person, to fix this thing. So collaboration is going to mostly show up in your tone of voice. And earlier we talked about how we communicate so often in text and how that can so easily be misunderstood. So if this is a conversation, the more cringy the conversation feels, the more you need to use that tone of voice, because it's your biggest tool. So it could be like, hey, can you hang out after our meeting for a few minutes? I have a question to ask you. And the more rarely you do that, the all caps big deal it's going to feel. So if
Yeah.
we can, as a cultural shift, get a little more used to picking up the phone or hopping in to something that's going to use voice, whether it's Zoom or Link, probably the easier these kind of conversations are going to be had. And we talked, like, rewriting an email 15 times to try and get the tone right takes a lot longer than picking up the phone.
Yeah.
All right.
So could
yeah.
I ask a quick question on this?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say the issue is that you're working on a team of teachers lesson planning, and there's a deadline and you need a certain part of the unit and it isn't ready yet. So how would you use the collaborative approach to approach that conversation with your colleagues?
One, you want to, like, do a mental check-in of your tone and your emotions to make sure that you really are trying to work alongside them to solve this. And you want to use something that is just saying how you feel clearly. So, which will bring us into clarity. So what was the expectation that you all agreed on? That's something that you can state. Like, hey, Tabitha, we all agreed we were going to have that lesson plan in OneDrive by Friday at noon, but I didn't see it in the OneDrive. Did I miss that?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can come back with, putting you on the spot, what would you say if you had just forgot or didn't get to it or something?
Then I would, if I had genuinely forgotten about it, I would say, wow, thanks for the reminder. I'll get that there as soon as possible. If I hadn't forgotten about it, then I would just say, I would be able then to give a time frame and say, I'm working on it. It should be there by 4:30 on Tuesday or whatever. So yeah, I think that works.
If it wasn't late already, I think that works really well. If it was late already, I think the person could come back and either agree to that timeline, or if it's already late and now they're extending it. And I think this is really key. If it's going to make you, the person that's trying to solve this problem, mad, if that person sends it at that time, if they agree to send it at Monday at 12 and it's not in your inbox by 12:01 and you're going to be livid because you have to rearrange your whole schedule, then ask for a little pushback because it's already late, but be really clear about it and say, I'm not going to be able to do that because I have other things later on that afternoon. Any chance you could get it to me by 9:30? And it's still that collaborative tone. You want to practice that, particularly if you've got a colleague that's honest and sincere with you. You want to practice that tone of voice a lot. I think it's the biggest bang for the buck of these 4 tips.
And I would add to that that the collaborative tone, I mean, it's good to have a general practice and say, like Liz would say, that she's going to go with a matter of fact tone there. But with the collaborative, what's special about that is that it's a two-way street at that point. So it's not about you didn't do that in a timely manner,
Yeah.
Tabitha. We're going to seek clarity on this because did you understand the timelines? Do you understand how this has put me back? And that's all going to be communicated. But at the point of collaboration, it's here's what we're facing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I'm going to offer and put on the table. Let's come to understand what you can do in this situation and how I can support you in that situation, because it matters. And that's the where we can strike up where we can. It's hard for me to talk about one and not the others.
I know, I was doing the same thing. They weave together. They
And
really don't work
we're going to take the
isolated.
collaboration and start to get curious. Is there a novel approach here that we're missing? That's right
Yeah.
under our noses. That hey, you know what? If I understand you're under some pressure right now, how about we just set aside a 30-minute time block and we hammer it out together? I can help you with that. If you've got the bandwidth, or if it solves that particular. But laying out things in a curious manner and a collaborative manner, so that both parties feel like you're taking something, you're getting the support that you need to have with, and I'm getting the documents I need to progress with my plan forward. So really puts a fine point on, this is what I'm going to do, and
Yeah.
this is what you're going to do.
Yes, that definitely speaks to walking alongside someone. And if I wasn't trying to come up with 4 C's or some way to remember this easily, it would say presume positive intent for curious. They really are so similar. And to bring in Brene Brown, she has this great quote. It's another one of those things that's on my monitor, which is, what's the most generous assumption I could make? Because you don't know what you don't know. And even if you wouldn't do this, it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. You're just trying to solve the problem. It doesn't matter what you would do in the situation. What matters is you can get your needs met so that your work can get done the way that you need to. And if you have that great open tone, if you have that curious stance, like, did I miss the email? Or I didn't see it in the OneDrive. Did I miss that? And it really is genuine, then I think you also have more room to give a little pushback when someone's like, oh, I didn't get to that to you on time, and how about I get it to you even later than you expected? You can use that tone to get your needs met and feel a little bit less stressed out because you have a tool. You're not trapped in this situation. You can say, that's not going to work for me. Any chance you could do this instead? And it can really help those relationships, and you feel less negative about people. So, Peter, you went through all of this with me. We've talked about curious, we've talked about collaborative, we have clear and check-in left. We talked a little bit about clarity, but I want to talk more. Which one of those 2 do you want to talk about next?
But I'm sorry, Liz, I didn't.
I was not clear.
I knew-
Clarity or check-in? I'm going to check in with you. Do you want to do clarity or check-in?
I think clarity would be a good place to
Perfect.
get to.
Yeah. So how would you define clarity?
Clarity is what's the issue at hand here. I would liken it to the learning targets in the classroom.
That's why I was hoping you'd pick it. That's your niche.
Yeah, I would liken it to that here are the presenting criteria of the issue. Let's clarify. And again, I'll go back to what I said previously, that this is how I understand the problem. How do you tell me a little bit about how you understand the problem? And it might be, hey, I still haven't gotten a response back from you regarding X, Y, and Z. Do you understand what I'm asking for there? Because now I'm going to up the level again, or change it to a different tone to develop that conversation with clarity.
And we talk about data being used all the time, but I think it can take some of the emotion out. So if you're in a PLC or you're meeting with colleagues and you have this colleague that interrupts you all the time, I think we've often been trained to say, like, I feel like when you interrupt me that you don't respect me. This is an alternative approach that would make me a lot more comfortable than that other approach, and you can pick which one works for you. But data makes me feel more comfortable with observable behavior. So
Mhm.
like, hey, colleague name. I don't want to use one of your names because I know you wouldn't do that to me. But, like, hey, I can't think of a name. But this
Just use us. Just use our name.
no, okay. Hey Cordelia, in the last 3 meetings, you interrupt me when I was talking. Is there something in the way that I'm talking that feels unclear? And that might not be the best example, but saying like how often that has happened with an observable behavior instead of like, hey Cordelia, you're really rude to me. What's going on?
Mhm.
Is
Or
much more
saying you
neutral. Yes.
always do this, or yeah.
Yes. And you can get lost in the weeds. Don't get lost in the weeds. Pick the most impactful thing. And the other thing is, we'll get to check in a minute, but check in with yourself. Does this affect you and your work? Does it stress you out because you're taking ownership of something that's not your problem? Or does it actually affect your work? People being late with work, that affects your work. People cutting you off can also affect your work, but you can kind of step back. Is it me? Did they do it to everybody? It's not your role to solve a coworker's annoying habit. So maybe some of those things we let go because they do it to everybody. So the last one is the check-in.
Hold up, Liz. I
Yes.
just want to go back to clarity for a
Yes.
moment because when we're thinking about that, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about the intersection of difficult conversation because it should be pretty obvious that to people to say, "Hey, listen, I needed this. What's going on?" And
Mm-hmm.
in that sort of rude fashion.
Mhm.
By this point, our profession has weeded those people out. Okay, we've got some great people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
what happens though is the data is really humanizing
Yeah.
because and it challenges us at the point of delusion because the difficult conversation is, oh, I have to ask Elizabeth for this
Yeah.
and she's going to be mad at me. She's going to be
Mhm.
so upset about this. She's going to think I'm coming down on her or I'm being bossy. I think that's a reality.
Oh yeah.
But if I can rely on the data because you I know are a human being too and have mind,
Right.
um, that we can both point to the same thing and objectively come away with the same understanding of it because that's what data does.
Yeah.
Look, the sun is out. It is daytime. Yes, that's how powerful data is. When we're speaking on that, it's not about emotional. It's just about being completely objective, devoid of subjectivity, of judgment, of this is what I'm looking at in a data
Mm-hmm.
orientated world, and it's beautiful. And I know you see the same thing because it's plain as day, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
really clarifying to the point of clarifying your own delusion of, oh my gosh, she's going to be upset at me, or oh, I hate to do this. And how often do we start the difficult conversation with the preface of, I hate to ask this question, but it's pretty
I almost
common.
feel like you set yourself up for failure that way. So if you need to write it out and then cross it off or script a couple of bullet points to keep
Min-
yourself on track.
Minimally cross that bridge before you have the
Yeah.
conversation and think about do you really want to say, I hate to start? Do you want to start the conversation that way? Hey, I hate Tabitha. I hate to tell you this, but
Yeah, like you're already
Like
like,
sound like
oh,
bracing for bracing for impact.
oh my
Like,
gosh, what's happening?
it's almost as good as don't take this personally,
yeah.
Oh,
you know?
then don't throw something personal at me. Make it about
Yeah.
a behavior.
Yeah.
And if you're genuinely curious, if somebody's always cutting you off, I think it is a really great way to show up with positive intent. If they're only doing that to you specifically, is it because they like your points, but they feel like you're being misunderstood and they're trying to be overly helpful, which is a whole other thing we could talk about sometime. But they're crossing that boundary, maybe not to hurt you, but to help you, especially if it's a friend, which can make the conversations even more awkward. And then you can get curious, well, why are they doing that? Or is there something about the way that I present that opens that door for interruption? And you can ask that question and you might get to the root of something that happened 3 months ago that they're carrying with them and you offended them and you didn't mean to, and oh my goodness, and now you get to unpack all this stuff and have this huge breath of exhale between both of you. And that's why I think this speaks so well to culture, is that it gives us tools to feel like we can talk about things.
Mhm.
So the last one is the check-in. And just like in a classroom, that check for understanding, that's really what a check-in is. It's this little kind of summarizing statement at the end of the conversation that's still going to use a collaborative tone, that's going to say, okay, well, going forward, we'll do this. Like, okay, great. Awesome. I can totally do that. I look forward to getting your lesson at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. Yes, that will
Mhm.
work. And it just makes sure that the way that you think you're understanding is the way you're understanding. Without the check-in, everything else can work in place, but you open the door to a misunderstanding, and then it's like, come on, I had the conversation, I was collaborative, and I still don't have the lesson. What is happening? So the check-in is really important. Don't skip it. What would you add to that, Peter?
It's an opportunity to build relationships too. The check-in,
Yeah.
Yeah.
keep that to make it more than just the project, because we're human beings, so that the check-in can come in the way of I'm giving you some more support here, like we agreed upon.
Yeah.
But it can also be, I really appreciate your efforts on that, and I think we really move things along, and to develop that relationship, that working relationship, to sort of point a finger at, hey, this wasn't going smoothly to begin with, but I'm glad I had you by my side to work through this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a better person for it, right? I'm a better work, or I feel better about the work I'm doing because of that. So I think that check-in, another way to call it, but it doesn't start with a C, would be a follow-up, right?
Yes,
Where you're
absolutely. I
just
know.
doing doing a
Maybe
follow-up.
it would
But
have
yeah,
been like
yeah.
CASP or something. I don't know.
And I think that that's such a vital step, because it in our world, we don't have the passing in the hall to say, hey, by the way, I wanted to say, and to kind of close things out like that and have those conversations. So the intentionality of boy, we really had our ups and downs in that,
Hmm.
or we, whatever the case might be. And if it's in progress, that check-in is still saying we're still in progress, but here's what I'm doing to support it. So it's really building that relationship, and it's something that just plays out day in and day out in our culture, that,
Yes,
that we're
definitely.
constantly giving each other feedback and reflecting and
Mhm.
trying to get um, to bridge the gap there.
Oh, I want to bridge another gap. So we've been talking about adults a lot. And Tabitha, I'm going to pose this one for you. I know that building relationships with students and kind of like the neuroscience of how these students learn
Mhm.
is something that you're quite passionate about. So what about how we've talked about clear, curious, collaborative, and a check-in? Would you change or reframe as we're trying to help students do this? Or if you're having a conversation with a student?
Oh, this is a good question. So, are you thinking more of facilitating conversations between students or the student teacher conversation?
I was really thinking of both, but you can go
Okay.
with one since I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Well, I don't know necessarily if there's something that I would change at the outset. What comes to mind first and foremost is just the fact that children have to learn these things.
Yes.
Like if you are thinking about how a lot of this that you're talking about, you had to learn like as a grown up, as an adult,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
know Peter, you probably feel the same, and I know I definitely do. Um, just the fact that you can't expect your students to come at communication as fully functioning human beings all the time. Like they're not there yet. They don't have those skills. And this is definitely a crossover into parenting as well.
Sure.
Because I'm going through that right now with my own kids, as how do you communicate with other people, and how do you think about your tone, and how do you think about how you're coming across to other people, and how do you have that difficult conversation with that person instead of going off and having that with another person
Right.
behind their back.
Right.
And so I think the key would just be that you've got to model it for your students, and you have to be intentional about teaching it if you want them to be able to do this with their peers, and then also have that foundation moving into adulthood, build in time and practice and opportunity for student peer-to-peer interaction, and have them practice giving each other feedback and asking each other questions.
Yeah,
Tabitha,
definitely.
follow up on that with how would this book end nicely with a growth mindset? Because you were talking about how we would teach um, students this, because it's that important. And especially with what growth mindset says about the mistakes in the
Mhm.
classroom.
Yeah, I think from an early age, children can sometimes get either labeled by adults or kind of put themselves into a box of what their personality is. Well, I'm this kind of person. Well, I'm that kind of person. Well, my mom says that I'm an extrovert, or my dad says that I'm shy. And they kind of put themselves into that box of, this is just who I am, this is how I function. And a lot of things that have to do with personality, we kind of assume that they're just set in stone. Like, that's the way that I was born, that's the way that I'm going to die, that's who I am.
Right.
And we don't think about it as being something that you can grow in, as opposed to something like reading or math, where you're always learning and you're always, making growth there. So I think just reminding students that communication is another skill that you're going to learn, that you are going to make mistakes in, you're going to learn from the mistakes, and then you are going to grow. Just reminding them that interpersonal skills and social skills and human interaction is not static based on your personality. And I think your example of that, Liz, at the very beginning was great, because you started out by saying, I'm just a super direct person. That's the way it is. And I, grew up in the South, where no, you're not direct about anything. Are you kidding? Like, we beat around the bush about what we want to eat for lunch. So, coming at it from a different point of view, but realizing that no matter where you started, this is something, it's a skill that you're going to grow in. It's not something that needs or has to stay constant your whole life.
I totally agree with that. I feel like it's this up and down game. Sometimes am so proud of the work that I've done and how far I've come with that. And there's definitely a correlation where the better or more disciplined I am, or the more natural this becomes of this, the more opportunities open for me to have better relationships, or even just more career opportunities. And I definitely use it with my kids as well. Instead of just being like, I've told you this 6 times, it's like, we've talked about this 6 times, and today it still happened. What's going on?
Mhm.
And then my kiddo will tell me something that I had not considered, because I am not in that child's world. And then it's like so much easier for me to show up with that collaborative check-in. Like, okay, well, how can I support you? Or like, what could we change about this that would be easier for you? Or I can't change this, but would you like to try this instead? Or what would you like to try this instead? So it's definitely applicable outside the world. And it's very, very natural and normal for us to accept that it is not a perfect tense. So we're going to go into grammar. It's not perfect tense. It is progressive. It's going to
Yeah.
continue to go on. You're not going to say, I have arrived. You will say, I'm arriving at progress, and now I'm declining, and I will get better. So giving ourselves grace, I think, is essential. From your all's experience, what do you think is really essential when you're trying to do this, and keeping that growth mindset?
Liz, just a little bit. What do you mean? Clarify a little bit on all of this. You said all of this.
Yes. So our topic, if you are somebody that maybe is seen as more direct, and you're trying to get better at communicating well, or you're somebody that gets frustrated with communicating with a particular group or situation, or you feel really uncomfortable and you're trying to get better, what, besides giving yourself grace that you'll have good days and bad days with this, do you think is helpful to keep in mind? Or on the flip side, how do you recover if you mess up? Either one, pick one.
I have something if you're still thinking, Peter.
Yeah, by all means, I'm still thinking.
I think reminding yourself that that awkward conversation, or the uncomfortableness of the moment, is just that. It's a moment in time. It's not going to be awkward and uncomfortable forever. So just, I think that's a big thing for me, is just remembering, hey, this is going to take up like 3.5 minutes of your entire day. Just do it and it's going to be over. But the effects of it, maybe the effects of not having that conversation, could be far more reaching. So like putting yourself through like a couple minutes of being mildly uncomfortable or awkward is going to be way better in the long run than just being frustrated and internalizing stress with your coworkers for an extended period of time.
Or losing sleep or ruminating on the situation. And at that point, the person has become like this huge, larger than life obstacle where really you don't know that they might be totally fine, or maybe this is a conversation that they've been wanting to have too. Peter, what about you?
Yeah, and that gave me some perspective, because I think that that's something to walk away from in this conversation, is being able to just step back from it and weigh pros and cons quickly about what's going to happen if I delay this, and then saying, I'll say it again, but doing the mental reflection of, okay, my perception of this is pretty delusional. I tend to think of, humans tend to think of the most negative things possible.
Yes.
In
Worst case scenario.
Worst case scenarios, we're going to go there all the time. But so I think having that perspective of, here's an opportunity for me to grow constantly, that mistakes are not important, they're necessary. We're going to trip along the way, but we're constantly refining that process and seeing it as an integral process to what we do every single day, in the virtual world or in any world we live in. Yeah,
that's all resonating with me. Besides this podcast, we talked about the Ask Manager. There's an audiobook, and her podcast is pretty short, but there are, I think, 2 or 3 specific episodes where, if you search for tone, where she models that. So if we don't resonate with you quite yet, you can check that out. Also, Dare to Lead by Brené Brown is something that has guided a lot of my thoughts, particularly for how much ownership am I taking, and do I need to take this much ownership of the problem, or do I need to set some better boundaries? Peter or Tabitha, do you have any additional resources to add to that list?
Only the encouragement that you have people all around you all the time in the workplace, and just reach out and try this approach, because it's simple. And like I said at the beginning, even if you take 1C and you work it and see how it might work, if you just change to a curious tone, a collaborative tone, see how that impacts your communication with your colleagues.
I don't have any specific resources that I can think of offhand, but I guess kind of the closing thought as I'm viewing this whole entire conversation is that the negative feelings that we have, okay, and this might be off track, but this is just something that's been on my mind. All right. So like you have this conflict, however small it may seem. You've got a conflict with a coworker, a colleague, and you've got some really intense emotions about them. Instead of saying, okay, I'm wrong for having these feelings, for having these emotions, my emotions are bad, that's what's wrong with the situation. No, like, feelings are feelings. They're all valid. And I've been doing a lot of reading and thinking about how we need to embrace all of the feelings that we have and recognize them as part of us, and not pushing them aside as wrong or inappropriate. It's not the feelings we have that are the issue. It's how you take those feelings and interact with other people. So I think that if you take a moment to process, okay, here are my feelings about the situation. They might be negative, they might be angry, they might be frustrated. Think through what those mean to you as a person, and for your own personality, for your own values, for your own growth. And if you get that part out of the way before you address the other person in the situation, then you're probably going to be able to come at it with a more even-keeled approach and utilize all 4 of those C's. Okay, so that was what was on my mind. Thanks
No,
for letting me get that out.
I love that. Feelings are information. If you're frustrated, that's telling you something, and it can help you get to clarity.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I don't
Um,
know this for fact. I don't know this for fact, but people who tend to communicate poorly, very poorly, and they just come out and lash out, are not acknowledging their feelings before they
Hmm.
communicate, right? We see
Right.
this in children all the time where they just
Yeah.
holler, and we're like, whoa, hold it. I understand you're upset, but use your words. Let's calm down here. And that's our
Yeah.
first step to coaching or raising a child, raising a child.
Coaching a child to adulthood sometimes.
Yeah, right. So, and that's the first step. And sometimes we can do that with our friends and colleagues too. Hey, you're upset right now. Let's just take a moment. Just have a moment. Settle down. So that's so important.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you all for listening to our episode on communication at work. We hope that at least one of the 4 C's, having clear conversations, using a collaborative tone, showing up curious, and checking in for understanding will help and encourage you to have a growth mindset about communication and all of the ways that we can handle even the most awkward conversations with a little more grace and a lot less stress. Wishing you great conversations, culture, and clarity. This is Virtual Education Show. Signing off until next time. I'm Elizabeth.
I'm Tabitha.
I'm Tabitha. No, I'm Peter.
And thanks for listening. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.